Hello, everybody, and welcome to a training on the matching process for approved families in the state of Pennsylvania who are looking to adopt a child via the SWAN program. This training is presented by the Capital Region Adoption Coalition. My name is Heidi Story, and I work for Diacon Adoption and Foster Care. And I'm joined today by Rachel Kerr, who's at JFS in Harrisburg. And we are going to together be providing you an overview of what the matching process looks like. So hopefully you get a pretty clear sense of what you should be expecting over the next couple months. Rachel?
There are many ways that we learn about children who are available for adoption in Pennsylvania. The number one way is that we look on Adopt PA Kids. This is a website that the state hosts that has pictures and miniature stories about children who are available for adoption. It'll list their information about them, including the name of the person who's recruiting for that child. You are welcome to browse this website at any time and to send the names of the children that you're interested in to your worker. We recommend that you also include the pay number. Pennsylvania Adoption Exchange is known as pay. The pay number, because often we have additional information about those children, but there could be 7 children named David or Gabrielle or whatever. And so separating them by who they actually are would be helpful. Not all children are on the pay website though, and there's also as recruiters for you, we receive flyers every single day from all over the state of children in need of permanency. And often we'll see a child first who's not on the Pennsylvania Adoption Exchange, and we may send those flyers to you so that you can tell us whether you want to learn more about that child. This is because some counties do not allow children to have their pictures up, and a picture is required. Some counties won't do that unless parental rights are terminated or the child is brand new to the system. You can also, at any time you see a child on pay or you hear about one from your recruiter, that you can call the SWAN helpline and you can ask for additional information. They have additional information in their system that is not on the public system, and they will want to confirm that you're an approved family, and then they will give you that additional information. They'll actually be able to answer questions or get information for you, even if you cannot reach your recruiter about this particular child. There are also matching events where we get children and families, or children's workers often, and families together. And these can be held in person, they can be held virtually. They are always listed when they're posted statewide to the matching events part of the adoptpakids.org website. And you can go on them. You will also, as a registered family, be getting invitations to things that are happening either statewide, virtually, or in your region. You are registered with the Pennsylvania Adoption Exchange when you are approved. You will probably be asked to complete with your caseworker a list of characteristics of children you're willing to have in your home and willing to consider. Child characteristic checklist is used to electronically match you to children. So in addition to these 3 ways, we might actually get notification from a recruiter saying your family was considered a potential match for my child based on my child's characteristics and the family characteristics. So when the time comes in your approval process to fill it out, be very thoughtful about it, be very clear as to what you're not willing to accept, and try to keep as many things as possible in the willing to consider column, because again, this will bring you in front of children and children's workers who you may not see on pay or hear about from your worker. Heidi?
So the first thing I want to say before we dive into step 1 of this process, which is the flyer exchange, is what it says on the screen here, that this is a process. So you might go through all of these 6 steps. You might go through steps 1 through 4 and end up back at the drawing board. There's no specific timeline for families and youth with which they proceed through this process. It's really based on the needs of the child, but we're going to kind of outline for you again in general what that looks like. So the first step is going to be exchange of flyers. So with the flyer exchange, what is included in this step, first of all, is communication between workers. So even though you're a licensed and approved family and you can call the SWAN helpline, best practice states that communication about prospective matches should be between your worker and that prospective child's worker. That allows the workers and the family workers to make sure that, again, you're an approved family, and get responses for you as quickly as possible, and make sure that your worker is kind of in the loop on the situation. I've had coworkers of mine who are doing CSR for a child, and they've received maybe over 100 inquiries for that child. So it's much more efficient if we can keep that communication between workers. Flyers for both your family and for a prospective child are strengths-based. So what that means is when you go to Adopt.PA Kids and you look up a child's profile or you see information about them on a flyer, you're going to notice that all of the pieces of information there are really highlighting the strengths that the child has to offer. They might include their favorite foods, what they like to do for fun, and things like that. And this might seem a little bit at odds with the training you went through before becoming approved, because in training you learned that all of the children available for adoption in Pennsylvania have experienced trauma and have various special needs. So even though it's true that Johnny loves chicken nuggets, he loves horseback riding, I guarantee that there are also some other things going on there, that he does have some special needs. However, at first blush, at the first level of communication, those personal identifying pieces of information are not going to be shared with you as a prospective family. That's going to be something that is included at a future step. So that ensures privacy for both you and for the child. If we're sending your family flyer to be considered for a child, we want that to have some highlights about you and your family on there as well, but we're not going to share your whole life story every single time you expressed first interest in a child, and the same applies on the flip side to the child. So through this process, you might have already created your family flyer with your recruitment worker. Sometimes workers help you with those, or you create them on your own. But that is like kind of the first tool that's used to explore and say, hey, I have a family interested in this child. We're going to send your family flyer. So if that's not something you've created already, you can be involved in creating that flyer or updating your family flyer as appropriate, so we have that tool to communicate about your interests. And once we get a flyer back about the child, you can again review that information, and based on what has been shared so far, see if you're still interested in learning more about that child. And if so, we will move on to step 2, which is exchanging additional information.
So in this step, you can ask as many questions as you think you need to be able to know whether this is a child you should continue to consider. Clarifying questions might be, we have 3 boys in our house. Is this girl going to feel safe with boys? It could be, we're a very active family. We're involved in a lot of sports and we do a lot of traveling. Does this child still have birth parent visitation on weekends? It could be anything that you see on the flyer that you want to understand better about that child. And these questions are directed towards your recruiter, who then talks to the child's recruiter and comes back to you with information. At this step, you can also learn about who else is involved with the child. Are they receiving other services? Are there mental health services in place? What kind of a school setting is the child in? Are there multiple medications to manage? If the child's in a residential facility or group home, what would possibly be recommended at the time they're discharged, so that you can decide whether that's in fact something that you're willing to manage. If the child has medical needs, it might be, does she come with nursing care, or how often do I have to take time off work to go to the doctor? So these are all things to be considered as you learn more about the child. And one of the things we want you to be doing in this step is to consider, if this child were in my home, could I manage those issues? And how would it impact my day-to-day life? A child who has multiple medical needs when you are a single parent working may mean a lot of time off to go to doctor's appointments. Is that going to fit in with your life? If it's a child who has a lot of mental health needs and you have other children in your home who are really active in sports, and it might be difficult to participate in a in-home therapy session on 2 or 3 days a week, you need to consider whether you're ready to make those changes. Something as simple as, this is a child who's an early riser, and we like to sleep in on weekends. We're not big about getting up early, and so we're not really sure we're ready for that change. Those simple things are questions that you can ask. in this step, because we don't want you to go further in this process if you don't feel like what the child's bringing to you that you know about is going to be something that you're willing to adjust your family to in order to manage. You can be highly involved in this by asking a lot of questions and seriously considering the information that's provided to you in terms of how it's going to affect your family life. And again, this goes to your recruiter, who then goes to the child's recruiter and back. And this can take a little more time than you wish it would, because often workers are out in the field, they don't respond immediately. They may have to go to other people to get information. So this can be a challenging step, so that as you wait for the work and the information to go through 3 different people. So just be patient. And as you think of new questions, send additional emails or make additional phone calls to your worker to ask. Heidi?
Yeah, and families can also be involved in that step by exploring a lot of other youth. At this point, you're still inquiring about the basics about a child and just seeing at a very basic level if it'd be the right fit. So continue to explore and look for other youth, even if there's someone in specific in your mind that you think is going to stand out for you.
Correct.
Step 3 is exchange of profiles. So if you are a certified and approved family already, you should be familiar with your own family profile and what that looks like. You had a chance to read and review it. So similarly, child profiles are also created for youth in Pennsylvania who are waiting for adoption. It is possible that a child you're inquiring about, their profile is not complete and it's not yet available. However, in general, I would say that these documents are available, and this would be the natural next step. If you're still mutually interested in this child, the child's worker and team is still mutually interested in you after those clarifying questions. So one thing that a child profile is not is it is not an all-inclusive perspective on every single thing that the child has ever done or said or anything that's happened to them. These documents are created when workers do interviews with people, birth family members, foster families, mental health providers, and do file reviews, reviewing the files about a child to create, as much as possible, a comprehensive look at the issues that brought the child into the care, their behavioral patterns, the relationships that are important to them, their mental health or psychological needs, their medical care, and things like that. However, again, be aware that this is not an all-inclusive document of everything, in the same way that your family profile gives a really nice overview of who your family is, but isn't comprehensive to everything in your life. So a county or a team has the full discretion to release a child profile for you to review. So oftentimes I see if a family is still interested after clarifying questions are exchanged, the child's worker or team is very open and eager to share the child profile with the worker and for you to review that with them. On the flip side, I also see situations where the county or the team is very hesitant to release that full and detailed information about the child's history, and they might only release that to a select group of families. When you review this information, if you're in a situation where a child profile is available for you to review, you're going to do that along with your worker. In the past, pre-COVID times, I think most of the time this occurred in the office. You'd come in, you'd get a hard copy, you'd read through it and review it. A lot of times now I'm seeing this being screen shared on Zoom where a family can review that information. But again, to protect a child's confidentiality, this isn't a document that's going to be given to you to review or do with what you will. Just expect that it's going to be reviewed together with a worker in that type of setting. When you read a child profile for the first time, be prepared to feel a lot of different emotions, because what you've learned about children in the system to date and seeing their strengths-based flyer or information on pay, it's going to be really different when you actually read about a real person's story and their life and the trauma that they've experienced. So this is no longer a theoretical child who's experienced abuse, neglect, and trauma. It's a real person that you're reading about, and I would just, as a family, expect to go into that experience and leave it feeling sad, overwhelmed, and just having some things to process through, because these are not easy reads. It's possible that this child profile may be old. Sometimes they're hot off the press and they're very up to date in terms of the information they provide about a child's functioning. But a lot of times they're a year and a half, 2 years even old, and there may be an update that's happening to the profile. Or again, you may have to revert back to those clarifying questions and ask the child's worker to kind of help you fill in the gaps between what is listed in the child profile, where they were residing at that time, what the diagnoses were, things like that, and where they are actually today. At this stage, and this goes into interviewing a little bit, but a lot of times too, with the age of COVID and usage of Zoom, you might be able to Zoom with the current resource family or other members of the team to just ask again some more questions, get some clarity on the child's personality or how they present in day-to-day life as you again digest all this information about the child, and continue to think about whether you can meet their needs and if they sound like they're going to be a great fit for your family. So what you can do to be involved in this process: review and process all the information you're reading and the questions you have with your worker. You might see some diagnoses on there that you're not familiar with or you haven't seen before. So research those online on your own. Talk with your worker about what in their experience they've seen in terms of behavior and characteristics for a child who has that kind of diagnosis. So you can be involved by asking critical questions. You can be involved by getting feedback from your worker about the suitability of the match. So what I mean by that is a lot of times these questions or considerations for a family are really driven by the emotional connection they're feeling to a child or something like that. But I would highly recommend that you also take a moment to say to your worker and say, hey, what do you think about this match? Based on your experience, based on what you know about our family, because you kind of know us, in an intimate way, or better than anyone if you've been working with that person for a while. Do you think this is a good match for us? Do you think this is our ideal match? Do you think that we can meet this child's needs? Do you have any concerns or red flags? And hopefully your worker would be, more than happy to kind of give you their 2 cents on if this is something that you should still express interest in and kind of pursue as a possible match. And the other thing that you can do to be involved is truly to take time to think. Once you review a child profile, again, that's a lot of information to digest, especially if it's your first or second time reviewing a profile. Take time to kind of let it sink in. If you're a 2-parent household, talk to your partner about how, what page you're on, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, like logistic questions about how this might work. And take the time you need to kind of digest the information and make a decision about whether you want to continue on with the process for this child, or there's some information you read, you're not feeling like it would be a good fit, and you don't at that time want to move forward after reviewing that information. If you do decide that you want to move forward and you're still interested in presenting as a resource for this child after reading their child profile, and conversely, your family profile being sent to the county, the next step would be to proceed to an interview.
I want to add one thing, which is to remember that many of our kids have been in the system for a long time, and so they have very lengthy histories in terms of psychological or educational. And I really want to encourage families to read to the end. Don't get stopped by the thing that happened in 2015 when this child first entered care, but make sure you go down and read the most current history, because you'll often find that children have made really strong growth. And I don't want you to give up on a kid just because you think that they're still the way they were 4 or 5 years ago. So thank you. Let's talk about the interview process. The interview process is when you're actually face-to-face with the child's team. And it's like a job interview. You're interviewing to be the job of parent to this particular child, which means you should remember that they're probably interviewing multiple candidates, and they're going to ask you questions that feel very uncomfortable and that you're not prepared for possibly. And they're going to ask you things you don't really want to talk about, but they need to know your thoughts about this child and your ability to meet the child's needs in the future, not just today. What's included in this step is generally your caseworker will be in touch with the person who has reviewed your family profile. And then after a period of time, organizing the team and setting up a date, you'll be invited to an interview. There are counties who will require you to come in person to that county and interview with your recruiter. And you may have to take a day off of work to travel to some place that's many hours away in order to meet face-to-face with an entire team. Or you may be able to do this on Zoom. And it may include the children youth worker for certain, but it could also include both the recruiter you're working with, There might be 2 recruiters involved if you have both a CSR worker and an OCMI worker involved with your child. It could include the therapist of a program that the child's residing in. It could include the guardian ad litem, which is the child's attorney. It could include what is known as a CASA worker, a court-appointed special advocate, who may have the longest running relationship with the child and know a lot about them from a social level, not necessarily from a clinical or from a children youth perspective. So you could have 2 people in the room with you, or you could have 12. I've been to interviews where there were actually people from the county board of child welfare who sat in interviews. So it could be a large room full of people, some of whom are going to know the child really well, and some of whom are there to grill you to make sure you're truly committed to the child. After the interview is over, you will be told to think about whether you're still seriously interested in this child, and you need to take, as Heidi said, lots of time to think about that. And they will be talking about you and any other families they interview, and will only be inviting you on to step 5 if they feel like you're the best candidate. So what is not included in this step is the ability to review the child's record. What is not included in this would be your ability to meet the child. The child will not be present at the interview. But what could be included in this step is the ability to ask additional questions of other people about the child, or ask for additional pictures, or often, if you haven't had a chance to speak to the current resource parent, to ask for them either to be included in the interview or to speak with them afterwards, so that you can find out about a child's day-to-day functioning. The best way to be involved is to be prepared for the interview. That is, even though you've read the child profile, go back and read it again and find out what information you really want to know more about that maybe your recruiter couldn't find out, but that you want to know before you know whether you can move forward with a commitment to this child. You might also want to ask additional questions that aren't clarified in the children youth record, in the child profile. And you may want to show up with a family life book, which is more than just the picture on your flyer. You may want to put together, I would encourage you to put together a book of pictures of your family life. Here's our house, here's our backyard, here's the play set, here's the room that the child would be in, here's a picture of every family member, here's some pictures from our family time together, here's our extended family who come every Thanksgiving and that the child will be introduced to, here's the grandma and grandpa who might be the after school care. Making a life book for the child to look at and for the agency workers to look at will tell them a lot more about you. A picture is worth 1,000 words. They may ask you questions about your marriage. They may ask you questions about your previous experience with children who have the same issues as this child. Be prepared to answer those questions. They may ask you where you see your family in 5 years. Are you going to add additional children, or is this the only child you're planning to adopt? They may want to know up front whether you're going to be asking for a subsidy or not. Think through these questions, review them with your recruiter, make sure you're prepared for them. They may want to know what experience you have with specific issues that the child has experienced. They're not going to say, what would you do if? They're going to say, can you give me an example of when you? Can you give me an example of when you dealt with a child who was aggressive towards animals? Can you give me an example of when your family had to deal with the loss of someone you loved? Have you had any experience with birth family contact? Tell me about a time that your child, the other children in your home that you fostered or adopted, have had contact with birth relatives and how that went and how you managed it. So they're not just looking at you today, they're looking at you as the future resource for this child till the child's an adult and can take care of themselves. And they're going to want to know not just today what you need to handle, but also what you're going to be able to handle in the future. Can you think of anything else, Heidi?
The only other thing I would add with that be that just like with a job interview, I would not expect any sort of decision to be made at this meeting. The county's going to take time to think about it. Again, you're going to take time to think about it. I have found myself in situations where a county is trying to already say to my family, oh, well, go ahead and set up a visit for next week. And then in my role, I said, well, actually not yet. No, right now my family needs time to think about
Right.
this and process the information alone with me, and we'll come back to you with our decision about our willingness to move forward when that time is appropriate.
Thank you.
So if this interview goes really well, again, Rachel mentioned that you could be one of several families interviewing for the child, which would be best practice, or it's possible that you'd be the only family interested in the child at that time. Afterwards, if both you and the county want to move forward and you are the chosen family for the child, you would move into the visitation process. So I'm going to skip to number 2 here on this slide, what is not included in this step. At this point, what is not included in the step is inquiring about other youth. If you have interviewed, you can go on multiple interviews for multiple different kiddos. But if you have interviewed for a child and you have stated your commitment to be a resource for that specific child, at that point you are making that commitment to be a resource for that child, and you're going to begin visitation with them. So at that point, we would not continue to inquire about other youth for you. So what the visitation process looks like is very different depending on the case, and specifically depending on the needs of the child. So this is going to be very child-driven in terms of what's going to be best for them, in terms of the pace at which the visitation occurs, as well as working through other logistic things. Some of the logistical considerations that hopefully you have been considering throughout this process are where they are currently residing. So that is both geographically where they're living, but also in what setting. So if the child is in another foster home, if the child is in a group home, if the child is in a residential treatment facility or another living situation, that's really going to make a big impact on how the visitation process goes. If you're just one-on-one coordinating with another foster family, or you're abiding by the group and the rules of a group home, oftentimes the higher level of care that a child is receiving, either in a group home or residential facility, translates to this visitation process is going to be slower and longer than probably up front you wish it would be. And again, the reasoning behind doing that is to set up both you and the child for success. Because if a child is in a very structured environment and we're hoping to transition them well into a family setting, there's a lot that's involved and in that transition to make sure that it is going to be ultimately, again, successful for all of you. So in general, this is a slowly increasing connection or relationship that you're going to be building with this child. So in general, your first visit is probably going to be a supervised visit, which means that you're not the only one meeting with the child. Either your worker, the child CSR worker, the county worker, or someone else is going to be there with you, also observing your interactions and seeing how everything goes. I've seen those first visits occur in person. I've also seen them in today's day and age occur via Zoom. And there's some creative things if your first visit is a virtual visit that you could talk with your recruiter about doing to connect with the child, like playing a game or doing like a show and tell where they bring some things to show you and you're bringing some things to show them. So it's not awkward, or you can foster that connection. After, again, based on the needs of the child, some supervised visits. At that point, you might be able to do a visit in the child's own home or in their community. So let's say they live 2 hours away from you, you're traveling to their location, you're taking the child out to eat or to a local park or something for a couple hours and then returning them to the place where they're currently residing. Increasing visitation is probably going to include some day visits to your home, either during the week or on the weekend. Those, again, to progress would probably look like having a whole weekend home visit where the child is visiting with you on the weekend. And, you know, we'd be increasing in frequency for all of those things as we got closer and closer to step 6, which will be placement. So there are, of course, always exceptions to this process. It's also, like I said before, based on the needs of the child or the rules of the facility in which they're residing. Sometimes we see matches occur, like we're recording this training in February. So if a match occurred now, it's possible that they'll want to wait until like May or the end of the school year to officially move the child. The timeline by which this happens, again, is flexible in every situation. When a child comes to visit with you in your home, visitation should look like normal life in your home so that you set up realistic expectations for the child about what they can expect in your home. So what that means is, even though you've been dying to lavish this child with gifts and special events and other things that they might not have experienced in their life before, best practice is to really hold off on those type of things. And again, give a child a real perspective on what it looks like in your home. So if you guys are homebodies on the weekend and you stay home, you just clean up, you might watch a movie, then that's what you should do when the child comes to your home. If you're busy, and you're running errands all over the place and going all weekend, then that's what you should show a child when they come to your home. Not to say that you can't take them out to dinner or something like that, but help set them up for success by giving them that true picture of what being in your family would look like. What families need to have in this step is a lot of patience. Another equally critical piece is to communicate with your recruiter about how things are going and to be really honest with that. We see kiddos who really honeymoon throughout the visitation process, and you really don't see many behaviors from them. And we see other kids who struggle right off the bat. We see families that really thought that this child was a match made in heaven on paper, and now that they've met the child and they see the way the child either interacts with their birth children or something else that's going on, they have concerns or they have reservations. Anything that you're feeling and thinking, you need to communicate with your worker. For myself as a recruitment worker, when my family has a visit, I'm expecting like that next Monday or the next Tuesday to get a lengthy email from my family telling me the things that went great, the things that went not so great, how they're still feeling about it, and just really check in on an ongoing basis, like, okay, we still want to move forward here. We're still comfortable. What questions do we have to make sure, again, that if there's any issues or problems that are rising, that we're proactively addressing those instead of letting those sit, because to be frank, if something's really not going well here, we do not want to proceed to placement and place that child in your home and just hope for the best. If things aren't going well, or there's red flags that are going on, we want to address those at that time for you, for your sake, and for the sake of the child. Some things not to do during visitation. Don't introduce this child to your extended family members on the first visit or overwhelm them with a lot of different people in your life. You might have sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, grandparents who are so excited to meet this child and who are a big part of your support team. But when you start visiting with this child, it's really about that connection between the parent and the child and your immediate family members. So going to a big reunion where there's 50 people around that the child doesn't know and can't relate to is going to feel intimidating and overwhelming for them. Visitation, Rachel, what else am I missing about visitation?
I think you've covered it. I think you touched on all the things I would. You talked about not buying them big ticket items and not taking to Legoland the first weekend, and being honest. I guess one of the things is, if you see red flags, I think the first approach is to your recruiter to say, is this something that you think can be worked out, or is this something that's going to be an ongoing issue? As opposed to quitting because there's a problem between this child and one of your children. I think that as a recruiter, we're going to say, is this something you think that therapy would help, or is there an additional training that might help you have a better perspective on how to handle this? So we don't want to give up just because there's one out of a dozen things that aren't working right, because I would expect that in any relationship. There's always going to be blips. The question is, can they change to work better? Okay. So if you get past all of this and you've done longer and longer visitation with this child, and you really feel like this is the right kid for your family, then I think you commit to placement. And committing to placement means we want this child to become a permanent part of our family, and we're ready to step into that. What's included in this step is all the planning for the transition. It could include anything from where's the child's belongings to what services need to be put in place, what educational setting does this child need to be in, and how do I get the IEP, and who's going to come and help us register the child for school. It could include the therapies. Where's your local psychiatrist? What's the waiting list look like? I know you've only been visiting for 3 months, but we're not going to place until June, so you might as well get on the waiting list now for a psychiatrist, because it could take that long. So usually it's a good idea to walk back through with your recruiter and the child's recruiter and possibly somebody from a placement or the current foster parent, and say what all services need to be in place for this child and who's going to make sure they happen and when are they going to happen. And also would be the plan for the actual who's picking them up, who is going to be, what's going to happen as soon as they get there, where's the child going to sleep, when are you planning to go shopping for the coverlet that the child gets to pick out in their favorite color. You know, all these things you want to make sure that when the child's there, they're welcomed into the home. What's not included in this step is generally the legal part of it. We're not doing termination of parental rights if termination of parental rights has not been done already. That's going to wait until we know that this is truly a permanent placement. We don't want to terminate parental rights on a child that does not have the commitment of your family and is not being successful in your family. Also, we're not finalizing adoptions that quickly. In Pennsylvania, the standard is the child must be in your home a minimum of 6 months before we're going to talk about adoption. We want you and your family time to adjust to this child and the child to adjust to you to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. And what's also not included in this is the going into it, having the knowledge of where the challenges are going to be. Regardless of what kind of visitation the child's had, maybe they've gone from weekend visits to coming for 5 days over the Easter spring break to coming for a week in June, we're not going to know for sure how this child's going to do in your home until they're there permanently. And so we need you to be able to communicate what comes up, what you may need to learn, what changes may need to take place, and also what supportive services that you need once the child's there. You are supposed to be the most active part of this part of the process, because you do have to say, here's what we need, here's what we did, here's what we think is the best plan, and ask the group, ask the team to accept your guidance. If you say, it doesn't make sense for this kid to come May 1st, unless he can do the rest of the school year virtually, we don't want him to lose the end of the school year. We want him to start in the spring and be successful in the fall and be successful in his school year. So how do we make that happen? That may be a court order. It may be somebody having to go to the school district and have a discussion with them. But if we're not going to know that you need that unless you say something. The other thing is to be honest with your caseworkers about where you're struggling. Maybe there's a behavior that shows up when the child's placed that's really a trigger for you. To be honest and say, this is making me uncomfortable, so that you and your family worker can say, do I need to go back to therapy? Do we need to go together? What would be helpful in resolving this? We don't want things to go all the way to step 6 and then immediately disrupt because you are not communicating there's a challenge. If you're concerned about your family finances, please tell us during this process so we can work it out. If you're feeling like even though there's a placement, you're going to have to travel 2 hours once a month for visitation with birth family until parental rights are terminated, and that's going to be a challenge to your pocketbook. Now is the time to say something so that those issues can be worked out. We don't want to find out 5 months down the line when the child's been with you that things could have been resolved right here when we're making the plan for placement. Also remember that the child does come with a team. There are lots of people to be supportive. Again, CASA workers are generally involved until adoptions are finalized. So are OCMI workers, so are children youth workers. Any one of these people can step up and say, what can we do to help? And the same thing is true for even a guardian ad litem who doesn't show up to every meeting. If there's something that needs to happen by court order, they're the person who's going to present that case to the judge to make sure that the best possible plan for transition happens. Some agencies will develop the child's service plan prior to placement to make sure everything's in writing and we've all agreed to it. Others will wait until after placement, but it always must be done no later than 30 days after the child is placed in your home. So be looking for a written document that kind of guides you on who's going to do what and when does it need to be done by, so that everything happens in a smooth way. Anything that I forgot, Heidi?
I don't don't think you forgot anything, but I will add one or two things. I think one of the most challenging pieces of this process, in my experience with my families, is the number of appointments and visitors and home visits and things like that. So you thought your schedule was packed before. You're going to have people in your home on maybe even a weekly basis. If you have family-based therapy, they might be in your home 3 times a week. At a minimum, you're going to have 3 or 4 people coming into your home once a month. And I do find families sometimes find that counterproductive because they really want to spend time connecting with and bonding with their child, and they feel like they have all these appointments. Birth parent visitation could be another one. So just keep that in mind, that that's typically for families a pretty big challenge to work through, and thinking through your schedule and availability and how to streamline, maybe by stacking some of those visits on top of one another, having everyone come at once so it's like a monthly meeting. But that is one thing specifically, I think, through the placement process that you should be aware of. The other piece is just like the emotions of it. You've worked between like going through training, getting your family profile completed, going through this matching process, months and months at a minimum to arrive at this place where a child is actually moving into your home. And I think that families sometimes, their expectations are that it's like the finish line of the race. Like, we made it, we're here, we've arrived. But it's not all sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows. Having anyone move into your home that's a new person, especially someone with special needs, it's new, different, I would expect to feel overwhelmed, under-equipped, and half the time be thinking, what in the world did we sign up to do? That is the normal feeling that I would expect a family to have. So I want to say that, because when you feel those feelings down the road, I don't want you to feel like you're failing, or that this means it's not the right fit because you're feeling those things. That's just going to be a normal part. And a child's going to have their own feelings to work through. They've had a lot of losses. They're uncertain if you're going to stick around. They might act like a chameleon and agree to everything that you're saying, even though secretly inside they really detest broccoli, just because they don't want to leave and they want to stay there. So
Right.
there's going to be a lot of stuff to work through to really get to know them, feel comfortable, work through the kinks, of letting this home be their home too. Their food that they like, the music that they like to listen to, the way that they want their room decorated, and really allowing them to have that ownership over their space. I think it takes time to work that out. And that's part of the reason, again, best practice is that you don't talk about adoption, until 6 months have passed, depending on the situation and the case. But let's make sure everyone's really thriving here. This is the right fit. We feel connected. We feel good before we move forward with that like legal and permanent commitment of saying, I am going to be the parent of this child, and move forward with that adoption piece. Those are just the things that I would add.
Yeah, I want to circle back to something you said, Heidi, which is that often people, because there are requirements for medical and dental appointments in the beginning, and you have to set up the new psychiatrist and get the child to a therapist or have therapists in your home, you could be overwhelmed with medical visits. But the truth is that the most important thing you have to do is to create a bond with your child. It's that emotional relationship that allows you to use that relationship to change child's behaviors, help them feel like they're part of your family, relax, feel like they're safe and that they're not going to have to go anywhere again. So even though you have all these meetings and these therapists and these doctors you have to go to, make sure you create rituals. Maybe it's a morning ritual, maybe it's a bedtime ritual, maybe it's, we don't do anything on Sundays, we don't leave the house on Sundays, this is our family activity day. Creating that time to create that bond will allow you to better manage whatever comes up. And that's a really important step. And I know your recruiter, your family worker will be full of ideas on how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really important part of your 6
Yeah.
months.
And to that point, Rachel, too, I'm pretty sure we mentioned this previously, but just in case we didn't, I want to make sure that everyone's really aware that oftentimes there is a huge shortage of behavioral health services and other services like that. So you might be in a situation where you really have a gap in services when a child is placed in your home. We'll do everything we can before they come to set up those things so that there's no gap in service. However, sometimes it's just not possible to do that. One other thing I would add, especially through the visitation and placement process, is for you to think about training. So when you went through initial training to become a licensed foster adoptive parent, you were presented general information about theoretical children. But now that you have a specific child in your home with specific diagnoses, this is the time and the opportunity for you to really dive deep into training opportunities that are going to serve the specific child in your home and the
Correct.
specific issues that you're facing. So maybe in your training they didn't cover autism, but now you have a child with an autism diagnosis. It is like astronomically important for you to understand the ways that that diagnosis is going to impact your child's brain, the way that they cognitively think, the way that they act, et cetera, et cetera. So for any diagnosis that your child has or any behavior that you're seeing in your home, this is your opportunity as well to seek out and ask your team for advice about training so that you can set yourself up to really meet that child's needs.
Or you could even ask your caseworker, do you know of another adoptive family who's handled something similar? Is there a peer-to-peer relationship I can develop with somebody who can maybe walk me through the challenges, the languages, what do I say in an IEP? What do I say when my behavioral health person actually shows up at the home? So ask for what you need. We can't guess. We have to have you verbally use your words. As we say to kids, use your words and ask for what you need.
Awesome. Well, I hope that at the end of this training and hopefully at the end of your movement through this process that you find yourself matched with a child who you adore and whose needs you can really support, and that you are well equipped to meet the special needs of the child that you're matched with here in Pennsylvania. I do want to say that this process is a general overview, and there are differences between agencies and counties in Pennsylvania. So while your agency likely follows the same process, please speak to your recruiter and ask specifically if you need clarification about what the matching process looks like for your family and your agency, because they're the ones that can give you that very specific information. I do want to say and remind you that this process does take a lot of time. It does take patience. The reason that it takes time is that, again, we want to make sure that we're setting up you and this child for every possible success, because they have experienced so much trauma, grief, and loss in their lives. And we want the prospect of them moving to a forever family to be something that's really based in commitment and full disclosure and understanding, and setting you all up for permanent success. So thank you for taking the time to watch and learn. We hope that this was helpful for you, and have a great day.
Thank you.